Christine Ann Diefenbach was born to John and Margaret Diefenbach on May 15, 1973, and grew up on 125th Street in the Richmond Hill neighborhood of Queens, New York. When Christine was a child, Queens was a very safe place, but as she approached her teenage years, things changed drastically. Drugs began to take over the streets, and drug violence spread rapidly through the area. The once safe streets were no more. In 1988, Christine was a 9th grader at Intermediate School 217, where she was known for her artistic talent and love of drawing. Sadly, that same year, a horrible tragedy occurred. On Sunday, February 7th, Christine got up early so she could go to the newsstand to get a copy of Parade magazine that featured an article about her idol, Wayne Newton. Just after 7:30 a.m., she informed her father of her plans and began walking the 5 blocks to the newsstand, which was located on the corner of Lefferts Boulevard. She was also going to buy the Sunday newspaper and a gallon of milk. However, she made the decision to go against her father's wishes and took a dangerous shortcut that would cut her walking time in half. Her father worked for the Transit Authority and knew very well the dangers of the shortcut, which consisted of walking along the railroad tracks that were raised above the city. While many residents used the shortcut, it unfortunately had become a hangout spot for drug addicts and dealers. Sadly, after taking the shortcut, she was never seen alive again. When she failed to return home within 30 minutes, her concerned father, John, went out looking for her, walking along the same route she normally took. Sadly, he found no sign of her, and the newsstand owner told John she never even showed up. By lunchtime, when there was still no word from her, John called the New York Police Department and reported her missing. At around 12:30 p.m., when John and Margaret were out looking for her, they came upon 2 police cars and an ambulance near the Long Island Railroad tracks. John quickly pulled over and showed the police a photo of Christine, informing them she was missing. That's when he got the worst news of his life. Officers were there because a teenager's body had been found, and upon seeing the photo of Christine, they confirmed it was her. She'd been beaten and died from blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators believe the attack was sexually motivated because when she was found, her jeans were pulled down to her ankles and her top was torn open. While it was apparent she had fought back, none of the suspect's skin was found under her fingernails because of the gloves she was wearing that morning. Police believe that she was attacked as she began walking up the stairs at the start of the shortcut, but never made it to the top because that's likely when she encountered her killer. While her murder received widespread attention around the city, it sadly never generated any strong leads. Interestingly, when the case was reopened years later, a tip was found from 1989 that came from an anonymous caller from a nearby bar called Glenn's Tavern. The person said that while in the bar a year after the murder, he had a conversation with a man who went by Cherokee, who said he effed up a young girl on the railroad tracks, and he believes he may have killed her. He also claimed his friend was with him at the time of the attack. In the mid-90s, investigators located the man and his friend and had their DNA tested, but the results were inconclusive. Just because the tests were inconclusive does not mean the men were ruled out as suspects. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after the murder, investigators changed their focus after a fellow police officer was murdered. On February 26, 1988, 22-year-old Edward Byrne was sitting in his marked patrol car on 107th Avenue and Inwood Street in South Jamaica, Queens, when another car pulled up beside him. 2 men exited, and one of them knocked on the passenger side window of Byrne's cruiser, while a second man crept up on the driver's side and shot him 5 times. Within a week, the suspects involved had been identified as Philip Copeland, Todd Scott, Scott Cobb, and David McClary, and they'd been ordered to do the hit from jail by a drug dealer named Howard Pappy Mason. All 4 suspects were eventually convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. As for Christine's murder, they began taking another look in 2018 and sent off evidence for advanced DNA testing. Unfortunately, no information regarding the results has been publicly released. Christine Ann Diefenbach was brutally murdered on February 7, 1988, and as of December 2025, this case remains unsolved. Craig Allen Frear, who went by the nickname Craiger, was born on October 14, 1986, and grew up in Glenville, New York. At 17, he lived with his parents on Yorkshire Court and had just finished his junior year at Scotia Glenville High School. He was the co-captain of the soccer team and was very well liked. He was a talented soccer player and had already caught the attention of several colleges. Even then, he knew he wanted to pursue a degree in elementary education. Sadly, he would never get the chance. On the morning of June 27, 2004, Craig told his family he was heading to his job at Price Chopper, but little did they know that he had lost that job a few weeks earlier and was instead going to his girlfriend's place at the Cambridge Manor Apartments in Scotia. However, his little secret was about to unravel when his mother, Veronica, decided to run by the store to pick up a few groceries. After learning that he no longer worked there, she called, upset, telling him to come straight home. He told her he would be home in 10 minutes, but sadly, that was the last conversation they ever had. After hanging up, Craig told his girlfriend he was heading home, but for reasons that have never been explained, he left his car in the parking lot and began walking toward the nearby woods. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. When he still had not shown up by that afternoon, his father went to the apartment complex to look for him and found Craig's car still in the parking lot. At that point, they contacted the Scotia police and spoke with an officer about what to do, and were told to continue looking for him. By July 2nd, when there was still no word from him, he was officially reported missing. The woods behind the apartment were searched numerous times, but no sign of him was ever found. Much of those woods have since been cleared for a solar farm, but even then, nothing. Some have theorized that he hopped on a train and left due to the crisscrossing tracks and the fact that trains move very slowly through that area. There's also the possibility that he fell in the Mohawk River, but due to the locks and dams, it would be very difficult for his body to have gone unnoticed. At first, his family decided not to make his disappearance public, thinking he might need some time alone, and wanted to give him space to work things out, but this hurt the case more than helping. As for his girlfriend, there have been conflicting reports over the years, with some referring to her as his ex, saying that he was upset that day because they had broken up. However, the only thing that is certain is that he was at a female's apartment that day with whom he had been romantically involved. Investigators don't believe that Craig simply ran away because he had left his wallet and $40 in cash in his bedroom, and his driver's license, which he had lost before his disappearance, has never been replaced. In 2021, police shared that at some point in the investigation, a coworker thought they saw Craig in the passenger seat of a car heading north on Route 50 in Glenville, sometime between when he disappeared and July 2nd, when he was reported missing. However, that sighting has never been confirmed. When Craig disappeared, he was wearing blue jean shorts, a white t-shirt, and Adidas sneakers with 3 black stripes. He stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and had all 4 wisdom teeth removed 2 months before he disappeared. If you have any information about his disappearance, please email crimetip@troopers.ny.gov or call 518-457-6811. On the morning of December 6, 1983, in Ellery, New York, a truck driver with Niagara Mohawk Power Corp discovered a woman's body down an embankment off Southern Tier Expressway, which is also Interstate 86. At the time the body was found, this would have been known as Route 17. The woman had no identification on her, and investigators believe her body had been there about 24 to 36 hours before being found. She was only found because the rain had melted the snow that previously covered her body. It was determined that she had been shot a total of 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the back, and once in the mouth. The bullets were either from a .38 caliber or a .357 caliber gun. The Jane Doe was estimated to be between 30 and 37 years old and stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed about 128 pounds and had curly dark hair and brown eyes. She had distinctive marks above her left eye, on her face, and behind her left ear, as well as a tracheotomy scar. Investigators believe she was likely not from the New York area. She had extensive gold dental work of European origin, expensive clothing, including a reversible trench coat made of olive drab wool from Germany, a skirt, blouse, and V-neck camisole from Italy, and other European-labeled clothes. These clothes were typical of a secretary or office worker during that time period. She also had an implantable uterine contraceptive device manufactured in Belgium, Finland, or the Netherlands. While the foreign-made device was not distributed in the United States, it was available in Canada. There was also evidence of a possible previous pelvic injury and a previous tracheotomy. They also determined she had a child earlier in her life. Genetic testing indicated the woman likely had ancestry from the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium, which might explain why her clothes and dental work were from Europe. One of the most puzzling pieces of evidence in the case was a note found in her pocket. The note was written on stationery from the Blue Boy Motor Lodge in Vancouver, British Columbia, and contained 3 lines of scribbled letters followed by 5 numbers. The letters, possibly written in shorthand, were difficult to interpret, but the numbers were clear: 24233, 68301, and 74261. The numbers are possibly telex numbers, which were used heavily in the 70s and 80s by ships, airplanes, banks, and the military. A typical telex number begins with 2 digits that represent the city or network. It's then followed by 5 digits, which represent the telex subscriber number. While the numbers on the paper are missing the city or network prefix, that was common when a person already had it memorized. At that point, they would just write down the subscriber number. This also matches up with the theory that the Jane Doe worked as a flight attendant. If that's true, then SAS could stand for Scandinavian Airlines System, and the KPH could stand for Copenhagen. The next 2 are less clear, but KR could be someone's initial, and BA could stand for British Airways. As for SAG, it could stand for station agent, which for airline crews was the person who handled hotel arrangements, transportation, crew rest issues, irregular operations, and crew legality. Basically, if a flight attendant or pilot has an issue, they call the station agent. Investigators have considered the possibility that she was a victim of Christopher Wilder, who was known as the Snapshot Killer. However, Wilder was not a truck driver, and investigators believe the Jane Doe was murdered outside the cab of a semi-tractor trailer. There were also reported sightings of a woman matching her description at truck stops along Interstate 90, including one specifically at a service station near Northeast Pennsylvania the day before the woman was killed. This theory suggests that the Jane Doe may have been hitchhiking as she made her way east. At some point, a man serving a life sentence in Oklahoma confessed, but once investigators visited him, they realized he was just a scam artist who had learned about the case from a detective magazine. Investigators also received a call from a woman in California who said that the victim was her friend from Toronto, but when they went to speak with her, she never showed up. In early 2025, the case was revisited, and a new Interpol Black Notice, which seeks information about unidentified human remains, was sent to Europe and Canada, but at this time the results, if there are any, haven't been publicly released. If you have information regarding the Ellery Jane Doe found in 1983, please call the Sheriff's Office at 716-753-2131. She was found in 1983, and as of December 2025, she has not been identified, and this case remains unsolved. Jill-Lyn Euto was born to Joanne Browning on March 26, 1982, in Houston, Texas, and grew up with her 2 sisters, Jenna and Carrie. Jill-Lyn's father was not involved in her life, so Joanne raised her daughters on her own. The family spent 5 years living in Colorado Springs, Colorado, before moving to Syracuse, New York in 1997. During their last year in Colorado, Joanne homeschooled her daughters, fearing for their safety in the public school system. Once in Syracuse, Jill-Lyn decided to be more independent, so she quit the 9th grade, earned her GED, and began working at Aeropostale in both the Shopping Town Mall and the Carousel Center. She dreamed of becoming a paramedic and hoped to be a pediatric nurse one day. By the age of 18, she was living on her own in an apartment on James Street in Syracuse and was studying to become a paramedic. Friends and family described her as friendly, independent, and easy to get along with. Despite living on her own, Jill-Lyn remained close to her family and had planned to spend Super Bowl Sunday with them in January 2001, but sadly never made it. The last time her mother, Joanne, spoke with her was on Super Bowl Sunday, January 28th. Jill-Lyn had promised to come over for dinner and watch some of the game, but strangely never showed up. The next day, Joanne called Jill-Lyn's workplace and learned that her daughter had not shown up for her shift. Worried, she and one of her other daughters went to Jill-Lyn's apartment to check on her. Joanne knocked on the door, expecting Jill-Lyn to answer, but there was no response. She also didn't hear Hooch, Jill-Lyn's little Boston Terrier. For a moment, Joanne thought maybe Jill-Lyn had gone out with friends and taken her dog with her. However, after knocking again, she finally heard Hooch whining. Joanne found the door unlocked and went inside, and found Hooch crawling toward her on the floor. She also sadly found her daughter's body and knew right away that Jill-Lyn was gone. She'd been tragically stabbed to death with one of her own kitchen knives. Investigators determined that Jill-Lyn had been murdered sometime between noon and 3 p.m. that day. Police didn't believe robbery was the motive, as nothing was missing and the locks were not broken. However, there were signs of a struggle, and while police collected DNA from the scene, it never led to any arrest. Police went door to door in the building, asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual, and what they learned was that Jill-Lyn was seen entering the building alone that day. After her murder, her mother put up flyers and 2 billboards about the case, and set up a reward fund and an informational website. She was determined to keep her daughter's case in the public eye, hoping that someone would eventually come forward with information, but sadly, they never did. Syracuse police have always suggested her killer was likely someone she knew or invited into her apartment. In 2006, Joanne sued the apartment's property owner, but the case was later dismissed for lack of proof or negligence. Tragically, Joanne died in 2007 after falling from a roof at work. All these years later, her family is still searching for answers. If you have any information about the death of Jill-Lyn Euto, call the Cold Case Squad at 315-442-5234. Even the smallest detail could help solve her case. Jill-Lyn was murdered on January 28, 2001, and as of December 2025, her case remains unsolved. Qua'mere Sincere Rogers, who is known by his family as Quaddy, was born on June 6, 2005, in Syracuse, New York. A year before Qua'mere was born, in 2004, his mother, 15-year-old Shaniqua Rogers, met the child's father, Damian Davis. Davis had told Shaniqua he was 18, but in reality, he was in his late 30s. Not only had he lied to her, but he was also physically abusive. After Qua'mere was born, he and Shaniqua lived together in an apartment in Syracuse. However, at some point, Davis showed up, knocked out her 2 front teeth, and demanded Qua'mere. Fearing he would harm her further, she handed the child over and sadly never saw him again. In July 2009, police received a tip that Qua'mere was an unreported missing child. When police questioned Davis, he claimed that in July 2007, he gave Qua'mere to a man in Brooklyn, New York. He said the man's name was Yusuf bin Ali and that he had never met him before. Davis said Ali was part of a group called the United Nation of Moors, also known as New Wabians. The group was led by a man named Dwight York, who was later convicted on racketeering and child sex abuse-related charges and sentenced to 135 years in prison. Investigators have never been able to corroborate the story and believe Davis was most likely lying. Investigators believe that when they received the tip about Qua'mere's disappearance, he had already been missing for 8 months, and they now fear he is likely deceased. Since the age of consent in New York is 17 years old, investigators decided to charge Davis in December 2009 with 2 counts of third-degree sexual assault and endangering the welfare of a child. The trial for the charges was delayed after Davis went on a 10-minute rant in court, claiming that extraterrestrials had taken over the world. It's believed he was faking it, but the judge still ordered a psychiatric evaluation, and Davis was ultimately ruled fit to stand trial. In April of 2012, he was found guilty and sentenced to 1 to 4 years in prison. Then came the most shocking part of the case. At some point, Davis's DNA was tested, and it turned out he wasn't even Qua'mere's father. It was also discovered that Qua'mere was actually last seen in late November 2008, almost a year and a half after Davis claimed he gave him away to the Nuwaubians. This means that Qua'mere was 3 years old when he disappeared. Over the years, Davis had used several aliases, including Ya'Keefe Davis, Ra'Keefe Davis, Zaquan Ross, and Zaquan Rose, and rarely used his real name. Also, before being found guilty of the sexual assault against Shaniqua, he attacked another woman with a metal pick in October 2010. Interestingly, when Qua'mere went missing, Davis lived with 2 other friends named Edward Phillips and Mustafa Burrell. Phillips had told investigators he often helped care for Qua'mere. However, in December of 2008, Burrell stabbed Phillips in the neck after he was allegedly asking too many questions about Qua'mere's whereabouts. The stabbing occurred 6 months before Qua'mere was officially reported missing. Burrell was arrested for the attack and charged with second-degree assault. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Investigators believe Qua'mere was most likely murdered and have full intentions of filing homicide charges if his body is ever found. As for the biological father of Qua'mere, his identity remains unknown. Qua'mere Rogers went missing around late 2008, and as of December 2025, he remains missing, and the case remains unsolved.